I would like to thank all of you all for coming in today and thank Nick. It's going to be a great day. There will be some awesome speeches, ideas that will come your way. So I would like to welcome Nick Vyas, who's one of the leaders and visionary of global supply chain. And I would like to start the symposium with Nick Vyas. Nick, can I escort you?
Good morning. I think that's, I'm looking for some feedback here. So good morning. Much better. Okay, just want to make sure everybody's awake. First and foremost, Raj, thank you so much for being a chair for the inaugural symposium here in Mumbai. So greatly appreciate your leadership in able to set this up. So on behalf of Dean Alice, USC Marshall School of Business, my colleagues, I want to thank everyone for being here, my distinguished guests, panelists, speakers, and for all of you taking time to come to our first symposium here in Mumbai. So the question might be, why does a university based in Southern California wants to come in and talk about supply chain in Mumbai? Why India? So I think I'm going to talk through over the next 30 minutes to give you some perspective about what's happening. What is the micro-macro trend that we're looking at it in terms of the global economy, global trade. And what I would like to walk away from that conversation is somewhat an in-depth perspective why India matters, why the future of global supply chain, and what the shapes and trends that's going to drive India to be a prominent player in a global market. So let's get started with sort of a quick agenda. So we're looking at the globalization as a trend, the impact on human capital. So I want to very specifically touch on this subject, the human capital, the technology trends. We'll talk about the omni-channel and retail, and then sort of give you my reflections and leave you with that thought. So let's just briefly give you a sense of who we are, right? So we have two distinct value propositions at University of Southern California. We have a center, the Center of Excellence known as the Center for Global Supply Chain Management, that really provides sort of a connectivity. And then we have a Master's of Science in Global Supply Chain Management program. That has two components, executive, which is an average age of about 38, 39 years old, professionals that they've worked in the industry for 10, 15, in many cases, over 20 years. We want to create the thought leadership in terms of globalization. How does they fit in their role, current role, and become the next generation leaders and further the cause. And then we have full-time programs in which we have students coming out of this university's undergraduate degree with 1 or 2 years of programs. So our mission is very simple, connecting the world through global supply chain excellence with network, education, and advanced research, known as NEAR. Right? It's a very simple way that we can be talking about global supply chain management and get stuck in Los Angeles or get stuck in the United States. It has to have a global connectivity, right? 2012, when we conceptualized this concept about taking a leadership, right? So I'm the founding director for the center and the co-founding director for program. And I'm proud to report to you in relatively short tenured, 5 years, we've been able to, our executive programs being able to rank #1 2 years in a row. And the reason is because our perspective is global. We're talking about issues that matters, not just in the US, but also connecting the world. And we are ranked #6 in US News and World Report. But more than that, academia, we can't just sit and talk about the theory. Or we can't just have an industry come to our symposiums. We need the policy makers, we need the decision makers also to collaborate. So we're proud to announce that 2 years ago, we signed the MOU, Memo of Understanding, with the US Department of Commerce. And I would like to briefly show the video about why collaborating with the policy-making body is also so critical in a global supply chain management. We are honored to have assembled such distinguished group of leaders from industry, from academia, to build the ecosystem essential to make the supply chain that it needs to be.
This is a natural place for innovators to come and to be, and USC has always been one of those great engines of creating innovators. We know, though, for the port, that our prosperity in the 21st century will depend on how well we get the port moving. That's what this partnership is all about.
Penny Pritzker is the 38th United States Secretary of Commerce, and it's absolutely wonderful to have you here, Secretary Pritzker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We think that digital systems can be a part of the solution, and we think this combination of an exhibition and hackathon has the potential to showcase a number of solutions, but I think there is a lot that can come from better information sharing.
That's probably the hardest thing to do, you know, to get people to think differently. But that's what we need to do.
Global trade has become over multi-trillion-dollar trade, and we're still working in a silo. So Secretary Pritzker, this is where the leadership beyond this room will have to work, and I'm glad that you are taking a role in this.
Well, common protocols are something that we at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is also part of the Department of Commerce, can help bring to the table. It is for all of us to work together.
And we're working with everybody. We're working with labor, we're working with the environmentalists.
That work will be buoyed by the research over the past 18 months by Nick's team of PhD candidates and faculty here at the University of Southern California to give us confidence that our ideas may work through the science that the research is producing. So with that, we at the Port of Los Angeles are extremely excited as to what today means to really catapult us to the next level. Nick, thank you.
I'm very excited about what we've done to date and the work ahead of us. Thank you very much for having me.
So this is just an example that how we are trying to create a confluence of different stakeholders within the supply chain and really bring them together. So imagine this, if this can be done in US, the vision is, can we do this in India? Can we do this in the large economy of Asia, which is China, or other ASEAN country, Latin America? So the goal is the global supply chain, when we talk about, is going to talk about globalization. So let me get into quickly about what is going on in globalization. Right now, we have heard so many politicians, so many countries talk about globalizations being bad. But let's look at the trends. Let's talk about the data. What we see here. So imagine beginning over there in 1820. 1820, so if I can take you guys back there, imagine the consuming class. Consuming class was less than 18,000 people, meaning the wealth was actually stored in a very concentrated communities. And now you fast forward that. Nothing's changed really up till about 1970. The world had about no more than 0.3% of the population. And when I talk about the consuming class, what I'm referring to as somebody who can go and buy a cup of Starbucks coffee or buy a pair of jeans, right? All you need is a $25 of a discretionary spending. So we're not talking about a lot of money. But imagine what the large percentage of the population. But then you continue to now look at post-1970, when US negotiated opening China and facilitating trades. And look what that has done, right? So now you forecast that in 2010, almost 2.4. That's an 8-fold increase of a consumer spending. Look at what we're projecting in 2025, right? If that number 4.2 translates to about half the population will have some discretionary capacity. Look at the rise of the middle class, right? The orange bar here, what that shows you that it is getting smaller and smaller. By 2050, this number will be very small. So yes, we'll have a poverty. Yes, we'll have disparity. What you're seeing, the green zone is expanding, will continue to expand. Right? Growth in emerging market. This is an incredible why we are here. Look at on the left-hand side, the data that I have for 2014, look at the top 10 economy. Look at the projection in 2050. China actually overtakes, China 2022 will overtake US. Followed by US, third, India. So makeup of economy, of top 10 economy is completely changing. Rise of the mega cities. Right? 25, I mean, imagine this. 25 to 60 mega cities that we created. Right? Quarter of the global wealth resides in these 60 cities. So imagine, if I take the entire world's wealth and I just focus my supply chain, my marketing, my sales into the 60 cities, I have a quarter of a market penetration. But this also creates a problem, right? How do I create smart cities? How do I build my supply chain? How do I make it sustainable? Look at this city, 25 million population, will surpass to about 32. How do you maintain the living standards and provide what we need? What we see in the mega cities, which by the way we define mega cities is 10 million or plus population. Look at some of the cities named here, right? Pune, Hyderabad. These are the cities in the Western world. We didn't know 40, 50 years ago that these are the potential market that we can do business with or provide opportunities, open up these things. So this is becoming a huge opportunity where we see this trend. Continuing on to that globalization, why I am so bullish about the global trend and globalization is because look at where the continent-wise, where the growth is. If you look at it from 1.8 billion middle class to 4.9 billion. Yes, so 7.5 billion populations, over half will qualify to be in the middle class. Right. Look at the growth. Asia leads the way with 83% growth. Right? The matured economies of the Western world, we will have a growth. But think about Europe, 2.4. North America, including United States, the forecast, the trend shows decline, right? Because what has happened, and these trends are somewhat concerning, right? When I show this chart, it is concerning. And we do see some issues, structural issues facing the economy. But the goal that I want to translate here is not to really succumb to it, but how do we become global player and sort of work with this trend and take advantage of it. Let me actually move on to what's driving this trend. So think about it, millennial consumers and e-commerce. Amazon in this space has changed not only the landscape of supply chain, but has changed the role of the supply chain. Biggest bet Amazon made is to focus on building the infrastructure for the supply chain. So first 10 years, market, board, shareholders was chastising Amazon, being an online retailer, to get into the distribution business, supply chain business, transportation business, logistics business. Today, those critics are shocked and left with awe. Right? Their biggest play outside the United States, guess where that is? India. They're committing over $6.5 billion capital to capture the same market share that they have been able to capture in US. So this millennial and the online e-commerce that we're looking at it is incredible, right? So what are the benefits of the globalization? Free trade, obviously. Free moving of labors. This has been a very controversial issue, right? We have become global consumers. We like the product that we purchase. We like the information that we consume. But when it comes to the labor piece, people moving across the continent has become a major issue. We've seen in the recent election in Europe, in US. So this conversation is a headwind towards the globalization. But in spite of that, the trend for globalization is strong. I don't think the civilizations will retract back. And any country, including US, that we can start to get our own raw material, build everything that we want to consume, and stay very contained within one country or one continent. So the key, obviously, are the questions we need to ask, and I want you to reflect throughout the day. Can the world afford to stay in isolation? My answer is no. The data suggests absolutely not. So when India talks about $170 billion spent on supply chain, American companies, Western companies will have to take part in helping India build the supply chain infrastructure of the future. Indian consumer market, we talked about 410 million consumers. Western companies have to look at that as an opportunity. And likewise, countries of this side will take advantage of the best practices coming out of there. Now let's talk about the human capital, right? Because this has been a very controversial subject that I want to touch. So think about the global supply chain job growth over the last 40 years, right? So 1940s, 37.7% of the change of employment. To now, you look at it, 19.8%. In 2000s, we're now looking at the negative job trend. And it's not the people are taking the jobs away. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm proposing here, the automation, the technology, the disruption that we're witnessing and has witnessed over the last 20 years is just a precursor. It's a precursor to what's to come. And if I don't scare you enough in my next 20-minute speech, I want you to reflect on it. The days before we had internet, the days before we had smartphones, to now, what we are doing and what we take for granted in terms of communicating, exchanging of data, I think has created immense, immense capabilities. So automation has a lot to do with where the jobs are moving. And how do we address that issue is a big question. So if you think about 2030 trends where most of the jobs are going, it's pretty frightening. Right? So how do we, as an academic institute, as a university, top 20 universities in the business school, how do we prepare the next generation leaders? How do we address that issues? But it's not just one university, one country, one continent. It is truly every leadership in every country would have to ask this question. What are we doing for our citizens in preparing for the 21st century job market? Trends are very, very strong, very severe. The jobs of the past will not be there. In 6 months ago, I published a blog, S&P 500, which is a 500 companies publicly traded, an index called S&P, Standard & Poor's. 40% of those companies will be gone. We see some of the companies that I've been affiliated with, Toys R Us, Sears, they're shutting their doors down. And these companies, by the way, they're 100 years plus. Many has already folded the doors, many will fold their doors. What drives that behavior is a technology. The world is changing in front of our eyes. It is becoming very integrated. Evolution cycles are rapidly evolving. What used to be one major shift in technology trend in the generations, we're seeing one every year. Look at this chart. Accelerating growth of technology. Civilizations were flat for centuries. And if I forecast this out 2050 and introduce some of the genomes and what's happening in human science, it will scare the living daylight of everybody. So the purpose of my conversation is not to scare you, but to make you think. How do we prepare ourselves individually, collectively, and as a society to this future? Which is future is not going to slow down nor stop. It's going to continue on. So let's look at the supply chain, where I see some of the major technologies that we're going to see. Drone, huge opportunity, especially in the last mile delivery. Imagine in Mumbai, the traffic. If I promise you 2-hour window from your click to ship, there is no way I can even deliver something in the 24-hour promised window without having my last mile truly be disrupted. So there's last mile delivery options we're looking at. The drone is really profound. FAA in the US has already granted 4 states permits to use the drone-based routing mechanisms. It's in the test phase. A lot of things will have to work out. Autonomous vehicles, that's the second biggest trend that we're seeing. Auto-guided vehicles is going to disrupt the driving market. Amazon actually just prototyped their 53-foot trailers, completely driven without a human. What does that mean? This is very scary, right? So imagine it's much more safer, has absolute no fatigue, and has a better record in terms of the safety incidents than human drivers. 3D printing. Although lately we have not been discussing this at the front, I want you to think about this. In a high-end manufacturing today, the 3D printing has replaced the molding operations of the past. SpaceX that launched the Delta rockets and now is one of the most successful rocket launching company in the world, led by Elon Musk, reduces lead time. What NASA used to take 3.5 years for the Delta rockets to turn around, he's doing it in 18 months. The critical 2 parts, the turbo engine component that he used to be the biggest bottleneck, he prints them on demand in his facilities, made out of titanium. On demand. 0 bottleneck. On demand. When that technology becomes commercialized and I can print on demand things that you need, my supply chain network, my manufacturing network, my logistics cluster will be very different. Operations within the distribution center. If I can actually build robotics to lead these functions, imagine the workforce, what my workforce is going to look like. We talked about autonomous vehicles. Google has driven almost 180,000 miles with less than a 6 infraction. Each of them, by the way, was caused by a human for being distracted. When they see this funky looking car driving, instead of paying attention to their driving, they will run into it. So imagine that record. AI and augmented AI. Machine learning and AI has a tremendous implication on supply chain. Right? Google, the speaker from Google actually spoke at our summit last year. And it was fascinating to see how machine learning will replace your forecasting, your S&OP, sales and operations planning functions, and completely make it automated. And this AI can disrupt the supply chain in a big way. And it's not a matter of when or how. It is happening now. Robotics. And then this question always gets asked. Yeah, but these are the robotics implementation always happens in the Western world. Let me tell you, folks, the biggest implementation of this will happen in emerging markets. ROI are getting stronger and stronger for investments in AI and robotics. So if you think about its implication on future jobs, it's truly, truly pretty dire. Right? I can replace 100 manual jobs with a function of one robotic application. But then what do we do with the 7.5 billion people, this emerging market? How do we train them? How do we skill them? How do we talk about the future applications for them? And then these are the things that we as a civilizations will have to answer. And it will not be a politician, the policymaker, or industry, or academia working in a silos. It will have to be collaborative opportunities that we'll have to look at it. And if you think by doing your undergraduate and you're done studying, think about it. If you have a runway for 20 years of employment or more, you will actually have to reskill and retool at least 3 to 4 times in your lifetime. Otherwise, you will become obsolete. And that's just not for the job. If you're running a business, you will not be able to maintain status quo. So these are some amazing trends that I would challenge you to stay engaged and look at it. What we see really is a market-based economy, a shared economy. Raj mentions about Airbnb, right? I only used it once in Spain, and I'll tell you, it was phenomenal. I was with my family in Sevilla, and my daughter, who is the biggest user of Airbnb, tells me to actually cancel the Marriott and stay at the Airbnb. 3-bedroom house on the main square of Sevilla, being rented out to a family from Los Angeles. Clean handshake, lockbox with the code. Code was texted to us just when we were there. We opened it, we used it for a week, put it back, the keys in the lockbox, and we were done. No human interactions. Imagine that property is probably $1.5 million or $2 million worth. Renting it out to somebody. It's a great experience. And what you see, that is happening in the transportation, happening in the warehouse, what Raj mentioned about warehouse exchange. Similar thing. Instead of building a dedicated warehouse, how do we actually take advantage of this market-based economy? A lot of disruption in this space that we're looking at it. I'm going to continue to challenge you with this trend to think about where the jobs and jobs losses are coming. And what you see, from the smart doing smart thing to the smart learning, everything is becoming smart. So not only we are using smartphones, but think about the word smart in our vocabulary being ingrained into our DNA. So this slide actually, you can't really see it clearly, but I'll actually post this up on our website for you to see. So we did a very deep dive into where we see the trends are trending, and the job market of the future really is very different than what we have seen over the last 20 years. But think about the automation, my previous comment, where the job losses will occur, the largest. And I want to look at the India being highlighted in the bottom. 69% of the jobs will be reshaped over the next 15 years. So when I had an opportunity in May to speak with the ministry on the supply chain summit, my biggest challenge was that if you're building the mousetrap of tomorrow with the thinking of yesterday, 10 years later you'll wake up and realize that that mousetrap has done nothing but to trap you. So challenge here is, as in India, the paradigm that this is how we have done. This is what's been done for the past, and we want to continue the practice. Needs to really be reevaluated. Once in a lifetime, this country has an opportunity to skip the generation of changes and automation. Can you adapt to it? Can you synchronize with it? And how can you diffuse 15, 20 years learning curves that Western world has actually gone through to be where they are. Can India afford to be there in the next 5 years? Can that happen? Or will it take 20, 25 years? Because if it takes 25 years and India gets there, that 25 years the world has moved to a very different frontier. So it's an incredible way to sort of look at it, this disruptive technology, understand its impact on human capital, impact on thought leadership, why we are here discussing these things, right? Understand impact of omni-channel. We talked about the relevance of brick and mortar. It's been challenged in the state. They're depleted and being killed as we speak. It's not unusual for us to read in the news the brick and mortar has gone out of business. Serious, serious thing. Asia, and I was actually in Shanghai with the Chamber of Commerce, and I spoke about this, is not immune to this trend. Are we thinking about it? What are we doing about it? So thing here I want to leave you with the status quo mindset and leading. You know, the concept of a village full of blind people, a man with a one eye becomes a king. And that's how we have ran a lot of these economies. But that one, you know, that is no longer an option. The globalization, as much as we hear the negativity around it, underlying fact is, US, we want to be a global player. Western economy has to have big play in the emerging market, because that's what the future is. The next generation of leaders have to be with that mindset. They can be living in one part of the continent, or country, or a state, or a city, and not actually have a passport to travel and experience what the world and interconnectivity that we have created. It is difficult. The shift is adjusting. Well, the wealth accumulation of the last 500 years from the West to the days of colonization has now come where the century is that of the East. If you think about between India and China, 2.6 billion people. Taking a market share of a top 5 economy, we are very cognizant. There is a lot of efforts being made to participate and partake. That's why we're here. That's why we're talking about global supply chain management in international settings. The disruption will continue to advance in our society, right? It's not the equity distribution for those who are disrupting is much greater than those being disrupted. I want you to think about it. Right? So if I am disrupting, I am being rewarded handsomely. But people that are getting disrupted, somewhat they're getting a shot. They're really getting penalized. Somehow as a society, we have a moral obligation to understand and plan for it. We have miserably failed in the US over the last 5 administrations. The job loss in manufacturing, in steel, largely driven by automation. And there's a further disruption that's happening. Uber, for example, disrupted a very, very industry, which was a cab industry. I can't even remember last time I took a cab in the US. For that matter, even many of my global trips. So imagine what happens to the cabbie driver. How do I train him or her? And we have to have that moral courage to address that issue. As a university, as a leader of the center, I'm very cognizant. We are certifying it, we're training, we're bringing the knowledge up front. We have a board that's engaged to talk about these things. That's why we are here in India, right? With that, once again, all of you, thanks for giving this opportunity to host our inaugural symposium in Mumbai, India. You know, the place that I obviously have a heritage from, place that I'm so proud to see is growing, produced 7.2% GDP growth, and Bloomberg just announced, right, that India will be the fastest growing economy. The thing is, are we going to do it right? There is a thought leadership. You cannot just have government engage as a community leaders, as a citizens, as a industry leaders, as an academia. Each of us and each of you will have to play that role, both here in India, back home in the US, and for that matter, globally, and create an incredible opportunity and global harmonization that we can all live and succeed together. So thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
Vyas, for the Supply Chain 2020 and Beyond, top disruptive technologies and the impact on supply chains, giving us the highlights, and also talking about this age of globalization. Ladies and gentlemen, we now open for the question and answer session. In case you have any questions, kindly raise your hands, and someone from the console shall help you with a mic. Please feel free to ask questions to Mr. Nick Vyas. Sir, can I please give the mic to you?
Sure. Thank you, Simran.
Any questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Did I shock you? Did I really scare you? Or hopefully I have enlightened you, at least along the way with the trends.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vyas, for a comprehensive, sorry.
Sure, I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
have a question.
Sure.
Sure, sir.
Thank you. This is Anand, publisher Apna Media. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. You spoke about disruptive technologies such as blockchain and AI and all that. And I understand that as part of your work, you travel the world and see these use cases and success stories in these technologies. So can you give us a few examples of the adaptation of these technologies in the emerging economies such as China and India to enlighten us? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anand. So in terms of the 3D printing, I talked about it, right? The titanium engine block. Let's talk about the AI, right? So AI is being actually, and machine learning, I'm going to combine these two. So Google has actually shown, and in fact, they did the demo during the summit, where they took one supply chain process, the procurement, and had created a code in ordering that product and being able to place a purchase order against that. In less than a 15 repetitious cycle of ordering that product, the model became smarter and smarter of adjusting the min-max quantity and adjusting the point of sourcing, reducing the total cost of ownership, the TCO. Imagine the human working on that 15 transaction in a month would not have recognized and optimized the entire supply chain value proposition and optimizing the total cost of ownership. So imagine what happens to people that work in a forecasting department, purchasing department, sourcing department. I can literally replace tens and thousands of people with having this program. So that's one example. Blockchain use case. So for those of you who are beer drinker, Heineken. I was in Amsterdam, actually spoke on this blockchain panel. Heineken took their entire purchase order payment system and put it on a blockchain. Meaning there is nobody in accounting payable, AP, actually matches the PO with the receipts and generates the checks to be paid out. All driven by a blockchain, a decentralized ledger with the proper execution of smart contracts, all done without having any interface. So there are so many use cases we're looking at it that really is going to change the way we think about supply chain of the future. I hope I answered your question, Anand.
Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Scott Knox. I'm an architect and urban planner here in India. And as we look at the catalyzing effect of machine learning on both AI and robotics and the elimination of jobs, as Klaus Schwab wrote about in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, how is that going to impact the supply chain of housing in urban areas, with job losses potentially reaching as much as 50% globally over the next 5 or 10 years? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, right? So the civilizations, we're facing this issue. China, from 1988 to 2007, if you haven't visited, had the largest human migration in the history of human civilization. 150 million people moved from the rural China into the main cities, tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities, right? The housing, transportation network, supply chain, when you think about the food, the essential commodities, medications, hospital, all of these things, how do you design these things? So there's a lot of work being done now about the smart cities, smart supply chain, and all of these factors and forces would have to really start to address. As larger density of population segregates in one city. I mean, you think about Mumbai. If you spend 2 hours just to commute one way and you spend 4 hours, think about the productivity loss that's associated with that. It just simply cannot happen. And I know the great work is being done building the metro and flyovers and those things. But those are the things that we're going to have to integrate into the future of our smart cities. Let's go this way.
I'm Pradeep Joshi from Pidilite. Just wanted to understand how the control systems work. You just gave a previous example of the payouts in the procurement chain. So how do they control this in terms of, because otherwise it'll all go haywire. Who actually takes control or charge of it?
Yeah, so the blockchain, right? So what we're looking at it is complete anonymity and security. If I described that this purchase order has a 4 distinct checklist that I want you to go through it, it's independently verified, and upon the execution of those 4 things that you identified, validated by either some IoT devices or somebody independently, that triggers the payment automatically. Right, so I have a very good colleague here, Arif Ansari. I mean, he's also flown from USC. Arif, his work, Arif, you want to stand up quickly, I want to recognize you. So Arif here, obviously, is part of my data science and operations, and he works with IoT and areas that I'm talking about it. So I'm more into the application side. He's actually on the science side in the back end. But the things we're looking at it is independent verification. Because what you're doing today, you have somebody in your office validating something. Tomorrow, there is no validation. It's done by systemic checks and balances and executed in a completely distributed way. So it's not just the data sits in your server. It may be on the cloud, being processed by people from a different continent, different countries, different time, giving you much better visibility and validity and transparency for that matter. Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Ashish Vipaka. I am an ex-tech person and entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, focused on B2B substantially 20 years ago. Today I focus my efforts on affordable, sustainable communities. One of the first few slides you had, you kind of showed that consumption grows or can grow at a very fast pace. How do you see the ceiling of consumption? My view is a little bit contrarian, but I do not believe either the human existence or the earth in itself can afford ongoing increase of consumption at the rate that we are talking about.
And that's an excellent question. Right, so if you think about today's population, let's take to 2025, 7.8 billion people. Planet Earth is not designed simply to sustain that populations, period. Planet Earth is not even designed to sustain 4 billion people for infinite time. We are depleting the resources at the rate that will bring our civilization to an extinction. So sustainability, I think, is as challenging as the disruptive trend that we talked about it, right? Civilization simply will not be able to live on this planet And I don't think the technology, even though we're trying to colonize Mars, will allow us to actually transplant the billions of people at a cost-effective rate and change the planet. So the answer is absolutely. So what I showed you, right? A family in China would have meat associated with the rice and the veggies once a week, 1920s, 1940s, if you were to take the landscape. Meat was treated as a sort of a delicacy. Fish was only harvested when the river allowed that opportunity or the oceans allowed that opportunity. Today, everybody wants a sea bass on the table, salmon on the table. How do we provide that? Fresh water, the future of war. If you start to talk about sustainability, we don't have enough fresh water. Right? The war can be fought and should be. Think about South Africa just recently. Right? Had to cut out the water supply, shut down Johannesburg. Right? So if you were actually staying in a Marriott in Johannesburg, they will restrict you to take a shower every other day. You would not, I mean, and we may actually look at this news and not understand it. But imagine 25 million people in Mumbai and we don't have access to the water. Or the dispute that would run the water channels coming around the mountains, touching 2 or 3 countries, and one country start to then conserve the water. So these are the issues that sustainability is a big piece for supply chain, is how do we stay frugal, conscious about the resources we deplete and how we treat our environment as a whole. And I think this is really a make or break for our civilization. So we need to really, so I'm of the belief, by the way, that you can be continuing to grow and be part of the global trade and still be conscious and still be sustainable. We have now the technology to do things right. The question is, do we have the will and mindset and the politicians supporting and creating that ecosystem that requires sustainability? All right, I'm actually going to take questions later on during the lunch because I want to make sure that I'm cognizant on the time.
Sure.
So thank you again, everybody. Appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Thank you very much, sir, for educating us and the next generation of business leaders. Can I please request you to hold on, sir? Can I please request Mr. Raj and Mr. Ajay, please, for the felicitation? A small token of love, a small memento from our end, sir, and a lovely bouquet, sir, to you. Can I please request you to take center stage, sir? Thank you so much for answering all the questions, sir. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for asking questions. If you have any further questions, we shall take them during the coffee break. I request Mr. Raj Das to present the memento. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, we would love to thank our keynote speaker, Mr. Nick Vyas. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you, sirs, for doing the honors. We would also love to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Bansali, who's here with us from USA. Thank you, sir, for being with us here. Ladies and gentlemen,